Hello everybody, welcome to OBooks Presents. Here we're introducing you to authors and teachers in the realm of spirituality, philosophy and alternative health and healing. It's your place to discover new authors. Please subscribe if you're interested in hearing more. Today I'm really excited. We've got a contributing author to a new book that's coming out called Pandeism and Anthology Part 2. His name's Chris Fisher, and his speciality is Stoicism and the philosophy and spirituality of Stoicism, and he's a contributor to the book on Pandeism. So we're going to be talking about Stoicism, we're going to be talking about Pandeism and how the ancient philosophy and the ancient spirituality can fit in with the new modern day sort of spiritual perspective of Pandeism. Chris first was exposed to the military version of Stoicism while serving in the US Marine Corps. The mental resilience fostered by those mental practices served Chris well while he served in the Marine Corps Presidential Helicopter Squadron and during the nearly 20 years in large-scale computing as a hardware and software engineer. Chris has studied extensively in the areas of psychology, cognitive science and evolutionary psychology, and to understand the frequently violent behaviour he witnessed on the streets. And eventually he's come back to Stoicism as the preferred place to maintain peace of mind in chaotic environment. Chris is a mentor for the Stoic Essential Studies program and a tutor for the Marcus Aurelius School, and he's formed one of the founding members of the Society of Epictetus. Did I say the name correctly?
Yes, Epictetus is fine.
Excellent. And it's a religious non-profit designed to train ordained Stoic philosophers to serve as chaplains and religious officiants. And he's also a detective with a large law enforcement agency in Florida, where you get to practice Stoicism on a daily basis. Hi, Chris. Nice to have you here.
It's great to be here, Ben.
Yeah. And there's lots I want to ask you. I want to ask you about Pandeism and Stoicism and the philosophical level, but I'd also, if that's okay, I'd like to ask you a bit about you've got amazing personal experience there, a bit about your personal practice, if that's okay.
Sure.
Excellent. So, well, firstly, you're contributing to a book called Pandeism, and for those who might not know about Pandeism or are new to it as a spiritual philosophy, could you say a little bit about Pandeism and what its form is?
Yeah, Pandeism is the concept that there is a divine intelligence, a universal mind, what we might call a god that existed, and at one point that being became the universe. So it's a difference between a transcendent being that creates a universe and remains apart from it. Pandeism is a divine being that literally becomes the universe. So now the universe is divine, the universe is God.
I hear you. So most people, when they think of religion, they're imagining the other option, aren't they? They're imagining something separate somewhere, interfering, judging, dominating our lives. And Pandeism is, like you said, a different emphasis, or massively different emphasis, that's using the word God is present in everything and everywhere.
Yes, yeah. The primary difference is between a transcendent God, a God out there in heaven, in the cosmos someplace, versus a God that is immanent, that is here, present in everything, a part of everything, and literally is everything. So Pandeism shares that concept with pantheism, which people will probably be a little bit more experienced with than Pandeism. Pandeism is kind of a novel concept to most moderns. The difference being that pantheism doesn't go as far as to say that there was a divine entity that ever was separate from the cosmos. They just say, the cosmos is divine.
I see. And am I in pantheism as opposed to pandeism? In pantheism, is that to do with multiple gods and goddesses, or am I barking up the wrong tree there?
Yeah, you're talking about something slightly different, but so yeah.
I'm thinking of polytheism. I'm getting one.
You're thinking of polytheism and the ancient Greeks, including the Stoics. There was some polytheism there. They didn't worship the literal gods, the mythological gods in a sense, but what they saw as the gods of polytheism for the Stoics were what we would call, I guess, emanations of the one God. So it'd be experienced in different ways or conceived in different ways, but not as separate entities.
I see. So from the Stoic point of view and the pandeistic point of view, that you can understand the universe in terms of aspects of the divine, different gods, different images, but ultimately the experience is it's all part of one immanent force present in everything.
Yes, absolutely. Both would be consistent. Anthony Long, who's a highly regarded scholar of Stoicism, of Hellenistic philosophy in general, but he says that the best way that moderns might conceive of the Stoic conception of God is universal mind, a universal consciousness. But that might be easier because, unfortunately, in modern times, the word God carries a lot of baggage for a lot of people, and they assume a vision of God that comes largely from Abrahamic faiths, and some people are very averse to that.
I just want to clarify, we've got pandeism, and how does that relate to deism?
Deism would be the more I guess I would say closer to theism, which means deism argues that there was a God, a universal mind, whatever, that created the cosmos, created the universe, created all of the laws that rule that universe, and then steps away from it and allows it to run on its own. So there's no, a deist would argue that there's no interference, no day-to-day interaction between God and the universe, that God remains out there, and we are apart from God.
Lovely, and that's crucial. And to pandeism, which says we're never apart from God in that sense, that God is always present.
Correct. So pandeism is kind of a blend of pantheism and deism. So you have a God that is by itself, that then becomes the universe, but remains immanent within the universe. There's no separation. There's no differentiation between God and the universe or the cosmos.
Thank you. That's very clear and very useful. Thank you. So your perspective in the pandeism debate, or not debate, the philosophy is Stoicism, and that's your area of interest and that you've studied and made a huge part of your life. I was first came across Stoicism in a novel called A Man in Full by Tom Wolfe, about a man who a big kind of billionaire who's on the verge of losing all his money, and fate has sort of taking away everything he's built and he's identifies with, and he turns to Stoicism at the end of the book to for the beginner who not really sure what it is, or is only might think of it, have a limited view of it, might think someone said it means a stiff upper lip or that kind of idea of Stoicism. For the beginning, how can you explain loosely what Stoicism is and its kind of key concepts?
To start, I'll start with what Stoicism isn't. You mentioned in my bio that I was introduced to Stoicism or Stoic concepts in the United States Marine Corps. Well, that's what we would refer to as the small s version of Stoicism. That's the stiff upper lip. From the British perspective, the Americans would say, suck it up, buttercup, kind of, the kind of mentality that you endure pain, you don't have any emotions, and that's not Stoicism. Stoicism doesn't deny emotion. Stoicism denies or teaches us, it's a therapy that teaches us to get rid of bad emotion, to eradicate bad emotion so that you can experience human well-being or human prospering. The key concepts of Stoicism, number one, they're famous for saying that the end or the goal of life is a life in agreement with nature. Well, when we hear the word nature, we think trees, plants, mountains, streams. What the Stoics meant was a couple of things. One, you might better say to live in agreement with the nature of things, which includes our human nature, but equally important, it includes cosmic nature, the way the cosmos is. And the Stoics believed that both of those were important. Then they also included a third element, which is our unique individual nature, because there's a lot of diversity within human nature itself. So live in agreement with nature. You'll hear the Stoics say that virtue is the only good, meaning not commonly held conception of good. We look and we say, oh, a good meal, a good car. That's not what they're talking about. When they say good, it's the only moral good. It's the only thing that contributes to our human excellence, virtue is. And that human excellence is what brings about what the Stoics would call well-being. In Greek, that's eudaimonia. That's a common term used amongst the ancient Greeks, but it's commonly translated happiness, but it doesn't, again, mean happiness the way we typically conceive of it. It means human well-being, psychological well-being. So the Stoics could argue that a person could be virtuous, meaning having human excellence, and could experience human well-being while being imprisoned. They went as far as to say even while being tortured, because your human excellence and your well-being doesn't depend upon anything external to you, which is another important concept within Stoicism. They limit our concern to those things that are called up to us, within our control, within our complete control. So in a nutshell, that would be it.
Lovely. That's very, very pithy. Thank you. So, it's kind of beautifully simple, right, in a way. I think... so we're talking about living in agreement with the nature of things, and human nature, cosmic nature. You mentioned different types of nature. And at the end, you made a distinction between what we do have control of and that which we don't have control of, which is crucial, isn't it? Because it would be unfair to read it as you simply stand back and you let things happen to you and you don't ever try to change anything. Exactly, yeah.
That's another misconception of Stoicism. Stoics do not just stand back and accept things as they happen. They are, in fact, the Stoics, unlike some of the other schools, the Epicureans, for example, taught their followers to be involved in society. That's a part of Stoicism. The Stoics said, we are not only rational animals, but we are social animals. So we need to be engaged in society. The Epicureans said, well, in order to experience tranquility, we have to remove ourselves from the tumult of politics. And the Stoics said, no, we need to be involved in that. Yeah. The difference would be the Stoic would get involved in that and would participate. There's a famous Stoic by the name of Cato who fought very hard against Caesar overtaking the Roman Republic and turning it into an empire. He fought and he fought and he fought against that because he thought that Caesar was immoral and corrupt. But at the point where Caesar wins, the Stoic has to accept it. That's fate. So you accept, well, I wanted A and I fought for A, I strived, but B happened. Yeah. So I accept it, not just willingly, but lovingly. That's what the cosmos had in mind.
What you're talking about is reminding me of some elections in England and the US recently where maybe people haven't accepted it lovingly.
Yes, Stoicism. Maybe the reason for the popularity of Stoicism right now is what's going on in the world politically. It does seem to be a philosophy that prospers during times of chaos, because people need to try to make some sense of what they can control. And we can't control our politicians. We go and we cast our votes, but may not be the person we want. But you have to live with that.
Lovely. And you've summed up very precisely and concisely the kind of core of the practice. And are there different takes within that? Are there different emphasis and nuances, or is it just kind of a simple case of everyday working and remembering and those principles?
By different nuances, you mean different ways of looking at Stoicism?
Yeah.
Well, in modern... Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, in modern times, you have, for anyone looking from the outside in and inside out either way, you have what has become to known as modern Stoicism, which is an adaptation of Stoicism. So historically, Stoicism, ancient Stoicism, existed from about 300 years BCE to about 200 years CE. The Stoa, it died out. We don't have any further record of it, at least in our historical records. In the 16th and 17th century, we had a synthesis of Stoicism with Christianity that had a short existence. And now in modern times, we have a new synthesis called modern Stoicism, which is an attempt to secularize Stoicism and redact the teleology. Lawrence Becker, in his book, A New Stoicism, argued that the teleology doesn't make sense for moderns, so they redact it. Moderns tend to just say that's not important. That's not an essential part of Stoicism.
I see. And by teleology, do you mean?
By teleology, I would mean the Stoics would use the word providence, a goal-directedness, that there is no innate purpose or intention behind the operation of the cosmos, that literally, using modern science, it is reductive materialism and things just happen by chance, and we're fortunate that we're here and that we have human consciousness, but that all of that is really the random accident.
Yeah, I see. So the modern take is almost like stripping out some of the pandeism in it, and it's just keeping the kind of rational, logical elements. Would that be fair? Yes,
some of them would argue that they're not stripping it out, but they're ignoring it. They're saying it's not important. It would be similar to what secular Buddhists do.
Yeah.
Secular Buddhists say, I'm not interested in any of the religious or spiritual part of Buddhism. I just want the therapeutic practices. So that would be akin to, and ironically, modern Stoicism attracts a lot of people who come from Buddhist backgrounds because there are some very strong similarities between the two. Yeah. Now, the version of Stoicism that I talk about in the book and write about in the book is different in the sense that I think that piece, I agree with the overwhelming majority of the scholars who've studied Stoicism, that piece is not just important, but that it is essential to both understanding and practicing Stoicism. So in other words, when you remove the concept of a providential cosmos from Stoicism, then you change its meaning fundamentally. Because remember, I said Stoicism is living in agreement with nature and the nature of things. Well, if I change the image of the nature of things from nature having purpose and meaning to nature being just a random accident, I've changed essentially what it means to live in agreement with that. That's the argument.
Lovely. So, for you're saying, the providential nature of existence is core, and that's where Stoicism links to Pandeism, right? And in your chapter in the new book, you outline the Stoic perspective on the divine within the universe, and thread it and compare it to what people are calling Pandeism today. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. The reason for the chapter is to say to those individuals who are interested in Pandeism that here is an ancient spiritual practice that is consistent with the metaphysical position that you're already interested in, which is Pandeism. And I would argue, and I do so in the chapter, that I think that even Stoic theology is probably closer to and may be considered Pandeism more accurately than what it has traditionally been considered, which is pantheism, partly because of what pantheism has morphed into in modern times.
Fantastic. And as a spiritual practice, and in your own life, you said you've come across, in the work, very lot of violence, or seen, some very brutal things, or I mean, some people say, I suppose it's the first cynical argument against anything to do with spirituality is, why is there violence or whatever? Could you say something about how it's practically, how you practically, perform the practice, and how it's helped you, and because it's not just a kind of nice idea in your head, is it? It's something very you put into everyday life.
Right. Yeah, it is. And and for me, when I witnessed that was one of the things that drove me to Stoicism. When I came to law enforcement, and you are exposed to what you see on the street in terms of human behavior and what humans are really capable of doing to one another, you start to ask, well, how is this possible? How can humans behave this way? And from a Stoic perspective, you come to accept that these individuals who are behaving this way are that way because they're thinking wrong. They literally don't understand. They haven't been taught. They don't understand what is truly good, and therefore they are desiring and they are seeking things that ultimately destroy their character and harm them, but they just don't understand that.
Yeah.
So part of that is society's responsibility to train them, but also there's the moral responsibility on their own part to learn that.
Yeah, and presumably you can do anything within your power to help them or train them or however, but ultimately that's only so much, and
ultimately it's their thoughts, it's their desires, and it's their intentions that create the evil acts, what the Stoics would call evil acts. And you're right, you can present them with the truth, but it is their choice. It's up to them. It's within their control. That's a key principle of Stoicism, is that the choice between good and bad, the choice is wholly within our control. We are not robots. We're not, even though the Stoics believed in a causally determined universe, they separated that from our moral responsibility. We still have the choice to develop our character and be a virtuous versus a vicious person.
And that reminds me of the fate and free will. That it's not what happens to you; it's how you respond to it, which is the important thing.
Absolutely. The critical piece is not what happens, but how you think about it and how you react to it. That makes the difference in you personally, which is what develops your character.
I recently read a book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, about his experience in concentration camps, and so he was exposed to unspeakably bad treatment and horrific conditions, and one of the and he came out alive at the end of it. And one of the things he writes about in the book is he realizes no matter how terrible your life can become and how out of control it is for you, you have a choice to how you bear it, even at the extremes he was under. And it seems to me that, and he said some people, not all people, but some people in the camps, retained, I think, what you're talking about, the part of the word happiness, or I don't know if serenity is the right word, but even in the face of all that horror, because they were they did something with the one thing they could control, which was how they reacted. And that seems to me touching on the core principle that you're talking about. Would you say that's fair?
Yes, absolutely. Frankl's book is a great example of what modern Stoics call the dichotomy of control. He understood that he could only control very few things, but what he did have control of was his own thoughts and his own perceptions, his own view. He didn't have to become like those people who had imprisoned him. He didn't have to start thinking like them. He didn't have to be damaged by them. He could still choose to focus on his humanity. Admiral Stockdale, who was a practicing Stoic, was shot down in Vietnam, and he talks about the idea that when he was shot down, as he was coming down into the Vietnamese jungles, he thought, I'm falling into the world of Epictetus, and he put into practice as a POW what he had learned as in college from Epictetus.
Wonderful. And so, if you're interested, if someone's listening to this and they're interested in Pandeism and that they're interested in these ideas, obviously that's the book to read. But if someone is interested in Stoicism, in particularly Stoicism, and is looking for somewhere to start with the ancient thinkers, where you're coming from, where would you point them?
Well, obviously, I would point them to the Stoic texts, but
Yeah.
the problem that we have sometimes as moderns is understanding what they mean, which means we go back to the scholars, we go back to the people who've dedicated their lives to understanding this.
Yeah.
My website, traditionalstoicism.com, I attempt to do that and point to the scholarship so that people can understand what the ancients meant by Stoicism, and then they need to make a choice. Whether they're comfortable with the ancient version of Stoicism, which includes this spirituality. Large number of moderns, will not be, and for them, there is the modern version that removes that. It's a very popular, very active group, and there's certainly nothing wrong with following that path. That doesn't necessarily put an emphasis on the spiritual aspect of Stoicism. It just separates them. The College of Stoic Philosophers, which is mentioned in my bio, is also a great place to get a basic education on Stoicism. You can start with the 4-month program, which gives you the grounding, the year-long program if you decide to carry on your studies. And then about a week ago, I launched a podcast, Stoicism on Fire. It's out on iTunes. It has 4 episodes up, but the important aspect, I would say, at this point of the podcast is my first few episodes, I'm trying to explain the spiritual aspect of Stoicism and the Stoic God, the concept of the God, and differentiate it, again, because there's so much baggage that moderns carry. And one of the podcasts, I talk about my experience coming to Stoicism. I was a pretty hardened atheist when I came to Stoicism, and it took about an 18-month period of time for me to open up my mind to the concept that, this is not what I'm averse to. This concept of God is something entirely different. So those are some resources.
Wonderful. So I think your personal stories, is inspirational, and I think people should definitely check out your podcast. And then we've got the College of
the College of Stoic Philosophers,
and then you can study a proper program there, and then traditionalstoicism.com.
That's my blog. Yes,
and that's your blog, where people can, where you're bridging the gap really from careful translation of the ancients to the modern.
Yes, and the thing I do there, and I want to say this, I'm not a scholar. I don't read Greek or Latin. So what I attempt to do in my blog is I'm attempting to bring the scholarly material to people and point the way. These are not my ideas. These are the arguments of the scholars. I try to make them a little bit more accessible, but those who go to my blog will see that all of my writing is very highly, intensely referenced to point you back to the scholars, so you can go check it out for yourself. Fantastic. Don't believe me.
Read the original. No, read the original. It's fantastic, and what I love about Stoicism is that it's very deeply practical, and the essence is it's very profound, but it comes back to quite simple essences. And I also feel it's part of, especially if you're living in the West, it's part of our legacy. Really, it's part of our ancestry. And I think I like the fact that there seems to be a new life and a new revival and a new interest in the ideas at the moment. Would you say that's right?
Yes, Stoicism is much more a part of Western culture than most people realize. We lost contact with the school for a long period of time, but it had already been incorporated into the zeitgeist of the Western world when Christianity kind of absorbed it. So if you look back through the literature of the West, you see Stoicism throughout its history.
I just thought of the Serenity Prayer. It's a bit like that. That's a Christian.
Well, a lot of people make the argument that is a Stoic, a Stoic source, and it's very true. That's a very Stoic piece.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Chris. Thank you so much for coming on. Pandeism is out. When's it out?
I believe it's going to be out early next year, from the last that I heard.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to it. The first volume was great. I enjoyed reading it. It was my first in-depth exposure of Pandeism, so I'm looking forward to seeing the second one also.
Lovely. And if you're interested in Stoicism or knowing more, then do check out those resources, and I'll put them in the notes below, and they'll be up on the screen as well. So thanks so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure, and all the best with the book and the teaching and the writing.
Likewise, Ben. Wish you well.
Brilliant.